My husband made me beg for money. Then he lost it all and came crawling to me for help, and I laughed in his face. My husband Jerry earned $250,000 per year and used it all for his personal expenses. He bought Rolexes while making me beg him for grocery money. You're too emotional to handle money, which is why you chose to be broke and work at a homeless shelter, he'd say, while spending more on one dinner than I made in a month. When I got pregnant, I cried because I'd always wanted to be a mother, and because I was terrified of how Jerry would react. He calculated how much the baby would cost, and scheduled an abortion for the next week. I begged him to let me keep it, but he said I'd proven I couldn't even manage grocery money, so how could I manage a child? He made me pay him back for half the procedure from my food budget while I cried myself to sleep every night for months. The worst part was how he'd bring it up whenever I asked for anything, like I owed him for saving me from ruining my life with a baby. But then federal investigators showed up at his family's nursing homes with warrants and camera crews. They'd been billing Medicare for dead residents and drugging elderly people who complained about abuse. Jerry's father and uncle got arrested on live television, while law enforcement froze all their assets, including our bank accounts. Jerry came home screaming that I needed to find a real job immediately to support us through this temporary setback. But then something amazing happened. My shelter got a massive federal grant and offered me the director position because I was the only one with the right degree. The salary was triple what I'd ever made, while Jerry now had nothing after lawyers took everything. We moved into a tiny apartment near my work because he couldn't afford his BMW anymore. Suddenly he was the sweetest husband in the world, making my coffee and packing my lunch with little love notes. He wrote out a budget for my salary showing how we could live comfortably if I let him manage the money again. We're a team, and teams share everything equally, he said while trying to get my bank password. I opened my own account and changed my direct deposit without telling him. When he found out, he cried actual tears, saying marriage meant sharing everything. You financially abused me for 5 years and made me beg for tampon money, I said while he followed me around the apartment. He swore he'd changed and that losing everything taught him what really mattered. But I knew he just wanted access to my money because no one would hire him with his name all over the news. He started love bombing me with flowers from the park and elaborate dinners from groceries bought with food stamps. I filed for divorce thinking I'd finally be free from him. Jerry laughed, saying his prenup meant I'd get nothing from the marriage. The problem was he had nothing left to protect while I was now making good money. My lawyer explained that since I'd been supporting him, I'd have to keep paying him alimony. Jerry showed up to mediation in his last designer suit with a lawyer he'd paid using his mother's jewelry. He argued that he'd supported me for years, so now it was my turn to support him forever. The mediator suggested we split things evenly, but Jerry wanted more than half of everything. He said he was traumatized by his family's crimes and needed my financial support to heal from the trauma. My lawyer told me to stay quiet even though I wanted to scream at his lies. I sat there realizing I'd escaped his abuse just to become financially responsible for supporting my abuser. Jerry smiled at me the same way he used to when denying me money for groceries. What's yours is mine, baby, just like when I had the money and you had nothing. His lawyer kept pushing for maximum support, saying Jerry deserved to maintain his lifestyle. They wanted most of my salary plus health insurance and retirement funds. Jerry fake cried about how I was abandoning him when he needed me most. He said I was heartless for leaving him during the worst time of his life. The mediator actually seemed to feel sorry for him, which made me sick to my stomach. I finally stood up to leave because I couldn't listen to him playing victim anymore. Jerry grabbed my wrist hard enough to leave bruises and pulled me back down. His lawyer pretended not to see while mine was busy with her phone. I yanked my arm away and headed for the door, but Jerry followed me into the hallway, still gripping my arm. I wonder how your religious shelter board would feel about their new director being a baby killer, he said with that same smile from our wedding day. All those Catholic donors finding out you had an abortion because a baby would inconvenience your career. He pulled out his phone and showed me an email draft addressed to every board member with my medical records attached. Give me everything I want or I hit send right now and you lose the only job you've ever been proud of. My free hand went straight to my phone while Jerry still had his fingers wrapped around my wrist. I pulled it out and started taking photos of the red marks already forming on my skin. Jerry tried to grab the phone, but I twisted away and kept shooting pictures from different angles. Then I swiped to his phone screen showing that email draft and took screenshots of everything, including the board member addresses and my medical records attached. My hands shook so bad I almost dropped the phone, but I needed this evidence. Jerry realized what I was doing and yanked harder on my arm, but I jerked away so hard I stumbled backward into the wall. The impact knocked the wind out of me, but I kept my phone up recording as he stepped toward me with his fist raised. His lawyer came out then and grabbed his shoulder, pulling him back while mine finally looked up from her phone. I turned and walked straight for the exit without looking back, even though Jerry was yelling that I was making the biggest mistake of my life. My lawyer called after me asking where I was going, but I couldn't stay in that building another second. Jerry's voice echoed down the hallway saying I'd regret this and he'd destroy everything I'd worked for. The security guard at the front desk looked up as I rushed past, but I kept moving through the doors into the parking garage. My car was 3 levels down, and I ran the whole way hearing Jerry's threats still ringing in my ears. I fumbled with my keys and dropped them twice before getting the door open and locking myself inside. The engine started on the 3rd try, too. I peeled out of the garage so fast my tires squealed on the concrete. I drove straight to the nearest police station, which was only 6 blocks away, and parked crooked in the visitor spot. Inside the station, a desk officer looked up from his computer as I walked in holding my wrist. I told him I needed to file a report for assault and blackmail, showing him my phone with the photos. He took me to a small room and brought in another officer who took my statement while I showed them everything. The bruises were already turning purple, and they photographed them with their own camera for evidence. I explained about the divorce and Jerry's threat to expose my medical information to my employer. The officer gave me an incident number and said a detective would follow up within 48 hours about the extortion charge. They asked if I felt safe going home, and I said yes, even though I wasn't sure. Back in my car, I sat there for 20 minutes just breathing before I could drive again. That evening, after I got home and triple-checked all my locks, I called Camila Gutierrez. She answered on the second ring, and I told her everything about the abortion Jerry forced me to have years ago. I explained how he was threatening to send my medical records to the whole board if I didn't give him money. Camila listened without interrupting, and when I finished, she said she'd call an emergency executive committee meeting immediately. She told me not to worry about my job and that they'd handle this professionally. The next morning, Wei Song was waiting in my office when I arrived at 7:30. He'd already talked to Camila and had a whole workplace safety plan ready to implement. We changed my parking spot to right next to the security booth and adjusted my schedule so I'd arrive and leave at different times. Wei took my photo to the front desk with clear instructions that Jerry was not allowed in the building under any circumstances. He also set up a panic button on my desk that would alert security immediately if I needed help. We reviewed all the entrances and exits, and he showed me 3 different routes to leave the building quickly. Then my phone buzzed with a text from Jerry saying I had 24 hours to agree to his demands, or he'd send that email. The message said I was being selfish and destroying both our lives over money that should be shared equally. I forwarded it immediately to my lawyer and the police, adding it to my case file. My lawyer called within an hour saying she'd filed an emergency request for a temporary restraining order. The hearing was scheduled for 3 days from now, and she told me to gather every piece of documentation I had. I spent the rest of that day and the next pulling together text messages and emails and bank statements showing Jerry's pattern of control. Camila called that afternoon to tell me the executive committee had met, and they fully supported me. She said they were preparing a response in case Jerry followed through with his threat, but they were more concerned about my safety. They didn't care about the abortion, and understood it was a private medical matter from before I even worked there. I started crying with relief right there at my desk because I'd been so scared of losing everything. 3 days later, I sat in the courtroom for the restraining order hearing, clutching my folder of evidence. Jerry didn't even show up, but his lawyer was there arguing I was exaggerating and using the legal system to avoid paying support. I testified about him grabbing my wrist and showed the judge the bruise photos, which had turned dark purple and green. The judge reviewed the threatening messages and the blackmail attempt with my medical records. She granted a temporary restraining order for 30 days prohibiting any contact between Jerry and me. After the hearing, my lawyer sat me down in a conference room to discuss strategy for the upcoming financial support hearing. She warned me that Jerry might still get some temporary alimony despite his behavior, because the law was complicated. The domestic violence and extortion would help my case, but wouldn't completely eliminate his potential claim for support. The next morning, Camila called me into her office looking worried, and I knew something bad had happened. She closed the door and told me a major donor had called asking questions about some situation with the new director. The donor had heard vague rumors and wanted to know if there was anything the board should worry about. Camila handled it perfectly, telling them there was an ongoing legal matter, but the board had complete confidence in my leadership. She reassured me that the executive committee stood behind me no matter what Jerry tried to pull. I thanked her and went back to my office where I found a card for the employee assistance program on my desk. Wei had left it with a sticky note saying the therapist was excellent for dealing with difficult situations. I called that afternoon and made an appointment for the next day because I needed help processing everything. The therapist's office was in a plain building downtown, and she had me fill out forms about my situation. When I told her about the abortion and how Jerry was using it against me, she didn't judge at all. She helped me understand that Jerry's abuse had gotten worse because he'd lost his power over me. We talked about how he'd controlled me with money for years, and now he was trying new tactics. She gave me homework to write down every time Jerry had hurt me, which filled 3 pages by our next session. Meanwhile, Wei came to my office with his laptop and a whole security checklist we needed to review. He had me change every single password on every account I'd ever used, even old ones I'd forgotten about. We set up 2-factor authentication on everything, and he showed me how to monitor my credit for suspicious activity. That's when we discovered Jerry had tried to access our old joint bank account 3 times that week. The bank had blocked him, but it showed he was getting desperate for money. Wei helped me file a report with the bank's fraud department just to be safe. 2 weeks after the restraining order, my phone buzzed with a text from a number I didn't recognize. It was Jerry saying he was sorry and just needed money for food because he had nothing left. I knew it was him even though he was using a burner phone to avoid getting caught violating the order. I didn't respond, and instead took a screenshot and called the police immediately to report the violation. The officer took my report over the phone and said they'd add it to Jerry's file for the prosecutor. My lawyer called the next day saying the mediation had been rescheduled to a shuttle format for everyone's safety. This meant Jerry and I would be in separate rooms with the mediator going back and forth between us. She said it would take longer but was much safer given Jerry's recent behavior and the restraining order violation. The new date was set for 3 weeks out, and she started preparing our financial documents for the meeting. That's when she made an interesting discovery while going through Jerry's financial disclosure forms from the divorce filing. She found transfers to a cryptocurrency exchange right before the federal investigation into his family's nursing home started. Jerry had moved almost $50,000 into Bitcoin and cashed it out after the accounts were frozen. He wasn't nearly as broke as he'd been claiming, and this completely changed our negotiation position. My lawyer immediately filed a motion for sanctions for hiding assets and demanded full financial transparency. Jerry's lawyer responded by proposing that I pay substantial support in exchange for a complete non-disclosure agreement about everything. They wanted me to pay Jerry monthly support and never speak about the abuse or the hidden money. My lawyer countered with mutual non-disparagement and zero financial support given the assault and hidden assets. The The negotiations went back and forth through formal letters while I tried to focus on work. Then a reporter from the local paper called the shelter asking about my connection to the nursing home scandal. Wei intercepted the call and handled it professionally, saying I had no involvement in the matter at all. He directed them to our media policy about not commenting on staff personal matters, and they didn't call back. But it made me realize Jerry might be trying to damage my reputation through the media too. That's when Camilla suggested I meet with Annabelle Cross from the Domestic Violence Advocacy Center for extra support. Annabelle was amazing and spent 2 hours helping me create a comprehensive safety plan for every aspect of my life. We reviewed my routes to work and figured out 3 different ways I could drive to avoid patterns. She helped me upgrade my home security with new locks and a doorbell camera I could monitor from my phone. We went through scenarios of what to do if Jerry showed up at work or followed me somewhere. She gave me a panic button app for my phone that would alert police with my GPS location instantly. The temporary support hearing was scheduled for the following month, and my lawyer prepared me for what to expect. The judge would decide if Jerry got any money while the divorce was pending and for how long. She warned me that even with everything Jerry had done, he might still get something temporarily. But she'd also requested a vocational evaluation to determine what Jerry could realistically earn if he tried to find work. The evaluator would assess his education and experience to see what jobs he qualified for in the current market. The hearing day arrived and I wore my most professional outfit to court, even though my hands were shaking. Jerry showed up in a wrinkled shirt looking like he hadn't slept in days, but I avoided eye contact completely. His lawyer argued he needed substantial support because he'd been traumatized by his family's crimes and couldn't work. My lawyer presented evidence of the hidden cryptocurrency and pointed out Jerry's business degree and work experience. The judge listened to both sides and then ordered the vocational evaluation before making any final decisions. He awarded Jerry minimal support of $800 a month for 90 days while the evaluation was completed. Jerry's face turned red when he heard the amount, but his lawyer grabbed his arm to keep him quiet. The judge made it clear this was temporary and would be reviewed once the evaluation came back. I left the courthouse feeling sick about paying Jerry anything, but my lawyer said it was actually a win. The amount was much less than Jerry wanted, and the time limit meant it wouldn't go on forever. 3 days later, Wei called me into his office and pulled up security footage on his computer screen. The guard had been checking old recordings after hearing about the restraining order and found something weird. There was Jerry standing by the shelter's side entrance at 6 in the morning 2 days before our mediation. He was just standing there for 20 minutes watching the door and taking pictures with his phone. Wei made copies of everything and said this proved Jerry was planning something before he ever grabbed my wrist. My lawyer was excited when I sent her the footage because it showed a pattern of stalking behavior. She filed it with the court right away as extra evidence for the permanent restraining order hearing next month. That same afternoon, an email went to every board member from someone claiming to be a concerned citizen. It said I was probably involved in Jerry's family's Medicare fraud, and the shelter should investigate me immediately. Camilla called me within 10 minutes of getting it and told me not to worry at all. She and Wei spent the rest of the day checking into it and quickly figured out it was total garbage. The email came from a fake address and had no real evidence linking me to anything illegal. They sent a response to the whole board explaining it was clearly someone trying to hurt my reputation during the divorce. The board members were actually mad that someone would try to use them to attack me like that. 2 of them even offered to write character references for my divorce case if I needed them. I was checking my credit report that weekend when I found 3 credit cards I never opened. They all had my name but addresses I'd never lived at, and $8,000 in charges. My stomach dropped when I saw the dates because they were all opened right before Jerry and I separated. The charges were for expensive restaurants and electronics that I knew Jerry had been buying back then. I spent hours on the phone with the credit card companies filing fraud reports and disputing every single charge. They said it would take weeks to investigate, but they'd freeze the accounts while they looked into it. My lawyer said this was actually good news because it showed Jerry was committing crimes against me before we even split up. She helped me find a credit attorney who specialized in identity theft cases to handle everything properly. The attorney said we could probably get everything removed from my credit report, and maybe even press criminal charges. My landlord was really understanding when I explained why I needed extra security at my apartment. He agreed to install a doorbell camera and change all the locks at no charge to me. He even added a deadbolt to my door and gave me the only keys, so nobody could copy them. The maintenance guy set everything up in one afternoon and showed me how to use the camera app on my phone. I could see who was at my door from anywhere, and the camera would save recordings for 30 days. My landlord also talked to the other tenants on my floor about keeping an eye out for Jerry. He gave them Jerry's picture and told them to call the police if they saw him anywhere near the building. The old lady next door said she'd watch my apartment like a hawk since she was home all day anyway. A week later, I was at my desk when the mail came with a fancy invitation to our annual donor gala. My hands started shaking and I couldn't breathe, thinking about Jerry showing up there to humiliate me in front of everyone. The room started spinning and I grabbed my desk trying to stay upright, but my legs felt like jelly. My deputy director heard me gasping and rushed over to help me sit down with my head between my knees. She got me water and sat with me until my breathing went back to normal, which took almost 20 minutes. She knew about the divorce and said she'd go to the gala with me as my +1 for support. We made a plan where she'd stick by me all night and help me leave if I felt unsafe. The vocational evaluator's report finally came in, and it was exactly what my lawyer hoped for. The evaluator said Jerry could easily make $75,000 a year within 6 months if he actually tried. He had a business degree and 5 years of experience that made him qualified for tons of jobs. The report listed 20 companies in our area that were hiring for positions Jerry could do right now. It also said Jerry hadn't applied to a single job since the divorce started, which showed he wasn't even trying. My lawyer said this report would destroy Jerry's argument that he needed long-term support from me. Both lawyers scheduled a settlement conference for the following week to try working out a deal without going to trial. My lawyer spent hours preparing a proposal that seemed more than fair given everything Jerry had done to me. She suggested Jerry get support for only 180 days, but he had to prove he was looking for work. He'd have to apply to at least 5 jobs per week and show us the applications or the money would stop. She also wanted him to sign papers saying he'd never contact my work or try to hurt my reputation again. Meanwhile, Camilla was quietly reaching out to our biggest donors to see how they'd react if the abortion story went public. She didn't give details but asked how they'd feel about supporting someone who'd had a medical procedure for personal reasons. Most of them said they didn't care about anyone's private medical choices and would be mad if someone tried to use that against me. A few of the religious donors said they might have concerns, but wouldn't stop supporting the shelter over it. Camilla documented everything, so we'd be ready if Jerry followed through on his threat to tell everyone. Jerry's lawyer called mine with a new demand that made me want to scream into a pillow. Jerry wanted $50,000 in one payment to walk away from everything and never bother me again. My lawyer laughed and said that was insane given that Jerry had hidden money and committed credit card fraud. We countered with $10,000 paid in monthly installments, but only if Jerry got a job and kept it. The payments would stop immediately if he violated the restraining order or tried to contact me at all. His lawyer said they'd think about it, but Jerry was insulted by such a low offer. That night I checked social media and saw Jerry had been posting vague messages about being betrayed and losing everything. He wrote about how someone he trusted completely had abandoned him when he needed them most. He didn't use my name, but anyone who knew us would know he meant me. My lawyer took screenshots of everything and said it was more evidence that Jerry was trying to damage my reputation. She added it to our file for the judge to see at the next hearing. 2 days later, I walked into Way's office at the shelter and asked for time off for all my upcoming court dates. He pulled up the calendar on his computer and we went through each date, marking them in red while he wrote notes about coverage. The deputy director said she'd handle the board meetings, and my program managers offered to take turns covering the daily operations. Way printed out a schedule showing who would be in charge each day I was gone and posted it in the break room, so everyone knew the plan. My lawyer sent over another settlement proposal that afternoon, this one offering Jerry $30,000 over 12 months if he signed the non-disclosure agreement. Jerry's lawyer countered with $45,000 over 6 months plus health insurance for a year. We went back and forth through formal memos for the next week, each one getting a little closer, but Jerry kept pushing for more money every time. I drove to the medical clinic where I'd had the abortion and asked them to add a HIPAA alert to my records. The receptionist typed something into her computer and said they'd now require photo ID plus a security question for anyone trying to access my files. She checked the system and confirmed nobody had tried to get my records since Jerry's breach 3 weeks ago. My lawyer called me into her office the following Monday to practice for the final settlement conference. She sat across from me playing Jerry while I practiced staying calm when she said horrible things about me being selfish and heartless. We spent 2 hours going through different scenarios where Jerry might try to push my buttons or make me lose control. She taught me to count to 3 before answering any question, and to keep my hands folded in my lap so I wouldn't fidget. The permanent restraining order hearing was scheduled for Thursday morning at 9 a.m. I arrived early with a folder containing all my evidence, including photos of the bruises, printed texts, emails, and a USB drive with the security footage. Jerry showed up 15 minutes late wearing a wrinkled suit and sat down hard in his chair, while his lawyer whispered something in his ear. I stood at the podium and went through everything chronologically, showing the judge each piece of evidence as I explained what happened. Jerry's lawyer tried to argue I was exaggerating and that Jerry was just upset about losing his family fortune. The judge looked through all the evidence for 20 minutes without saying anything, while we all sat there waiting. He finally looked up and said the evidence clearly showed a pattern of escalating behavior that posed a real threat to my safety. He granted a 1-year restraining order and warned Jerry that any violation would result in immediate arrest without bail. Jerry's face turned bright red and he started to stand up, but his lawyer grabbed his arm and pulled him back down. 3 days after the restraining order, we finally reached a settlement agreement. Jerry would get $25,000 over 6 months, but the payments decreased each month from $6,000 down to $2,000. He had to provide proof of job applications every week and attend therapy sessions, or the payments would stop immediately. He also had to sign a non-disclosure agreement that included a $50,000 penalty if he ever contacted my work or said anything about the abortion. Jerry showed up to sign the papers looking like he hadn't slept in days. He started yelling about how unfair everything was and how I'd destroyed his life after everything he'd done for me. His lawyer reminded him about the potential criminal charges for extortion and credit card fraud if he didn't sign. Jerry grabbed the pen so hard I thought he might break it and scrawled his signature on every page while staring at me with pure hatred. I met with the full board the next afternoon in the conference room where Camilla had arranged coffee and cookies. I handed out folders containing copies of the signed settlement, the restraining order, and a letter from my lawyer confirming everything was legally resolved. The board members passed the documents around while I explained that Jerry could no longer contact me or the shelter, and that any violation would result in a fine of $100, result in criminal prosecution. They voted unanimously to approve a $10,000 security upgrade, including new cameras, keycard access, and panic buttons in every office. Camilla asked me to work with Way on creating a workplace policy for employees dealing with domestic violence. We spent the next week researching other organizations' policies and writing up a comprehensive plan. The new policy included 10 days of paid safety leave, free legal consultations, flexible work arrangements, and funding for security measures like changing locks or installing cameras at home. Way presented it to the board at the next meeting and they approved it immediately, making us one of the first shelters in the state with such a policy. The new policy included 10 days of paid safety leave, free legal consultations, flexible work arrangements, and funding for security measures like changing locks or installing cameras at home. Way presented it to the board at the next meeting and they approved it immediately, making us one of the first shelters in the state with such a policy. 2 weeks later, my phone rang while I was reviewing grant applications, and Jerry's mother's number appeared on the screen. I let it go to voicemail and listened to her message saying Jerry just needed closure, and could I please call him back to help him move on. I forwarded the voicemail to my lawyer, who drafted a cease and desist letter that afternoon, reminding them both about the restraining order terms. She sent it certified mail and emailed me copies for my records, while I blocked Jerry's mother's number on my phone. The following Thursday, I sat in my therapist's office and talked about the baby for the first time without Jerry's voice in my head. She helped me understand that my grief was real and valid, even though Jerry had forced the decision on me. I cried for 20 minutes straight while she handed me tissues and reminded me that Jerry's cruelty didn't erase my loss. We worked through exercises to separate the abortion itself from Jerry's manipulation and control around it. I left feeling lighter than I had in years, and scheduled my next appointment for 2 weeks out. The shelter's annual fundraising dinner happened 3 weeks later at a hotel downtown, with 200 donors in attendance. I wore my best dress and practiced my speech about our new programs while greeting people at the cocktail hour. A major donor pulled me aside near the bar and asked about the situation she'd heard rumors about. I kept my face calm and told her it was a personal legal matter that had been fully resolved with no impact on the shelter. She nodded, and I quickly redirected to telling her about our job training program's 90% success rate. The conversation shifted, and she ended up pledging an extra $10,000 for the program. 3 months passed, and I checked my bank account every Friday to watch my emergency fund grow despite the support payments. I created spreadsheets tracking every expense and calculated how much I could save each month after bills. The numbers showed I could build a solid cushion even with Jerry getting his temporary payments. I opened a high-yield savings account and set up automatic transfers from my checking account. My confidence grew each time I saw the balance increase and realized I was managing money better than Jerry ever had. Jerry's lawyer sent employment verification showing he'd started at a car dealership selling used vehicles on commission. The document confirmed his income would trigger the payment reduction next month per our settlement agreement. I filed the paperwork with my other legal documents and marked the date on my calendar. The dealership's website showed Jerry in a cheap suit standing next to economy cars instead of the luxury vehicles he used to drive. 2 months into the new year, I got an email from the medical record security system I'd set up. The alert confirmed no unauthorized access attempts had occurred in the past 60 days. I printed the report and brought it to Camilla during our weekly meeting. She reviewed it and confirmed the board considered the entire matter closed with zero impact on my position or reputation. She filed the report in my personnel file, and we moved on to discussing the shelter's expansion plans. On a Saturday morning, I drove past the coffee shop I'd always wanted to try, but Jerry said was overpriced. I parked and walked inside, ordering a large latte with an extra shot and a chocolate croissant. The barista made small talk while preparing my order, and I realized I was smiling genuinely for the first time in months. I sat by the window watching people walk by and sipped my coffee slowly without checking the time. Nobody was waiting for me or tracking my spending or demanding explanations for my choices. I stayed for an hour reading a book I'd bought with my own money and didn't feel guilty once. Jerry's lawyer emailed confirming the final support payment was scheduled for next month, and Jerry remained employed at the dealership. The vocational evaluator's prediction about his earning potential had proven accurate according to the tax documents they provided. I forwarded everything to my lawyer, who confirmed all obligations would end on schedule with no extensions possible. The settlement terms were clear, and Jerry had met the employment requirements that prevented any payment increases. During our Monday staff meeting, Way pulled me aside with a huge smile on his face. He told me the shelter had received the federal grant renewal we'd applied for, plus a 20% increase. The board wanted to meet with me that afternoon to discuss a raise given my leadership through everything. I accepted the meeting request and spent lunch reviewing our budget projections and program outcomes. The board approved a $15,000 raise effective immediately, and thanked me for my dedication. I signed the paperwork and updated my budget spreadsheet that evening with the new numbers. My therapist and I sat in her office 6 months after that terrible mediation day reviewing my progress. The nightmares had stopped completely, and I was sleeping through the night without medication. We decided to reduce our sessions to monthly check-ins since I was managing my anxiety well. She gave me exercises to practice on my own, and reminded me I could always call if I needed extra support. I left her office and drove home feeling steady and strong and ready for whatever came next. 6 months after that horrible day in mediation, I stood at the back of our shelter's main hall, watching 23 people in caps and gowns walk across the makeshift stage. Each graduate from our job training program shook my hand and thanked me for believing in them while their families cheered from folding chairs we'd borrowed from the church next door. One woman who'd been living in her car when she started our program now had a job as a medical assistant and keys to her own apartment. Another man who'd struggled with addiction for years was starting work at a construction company on Monday with full benefits. I helped hand out certificates and took photos with everyone who asked and remembered why I'd chosen this work in the first place. The next morning, an envelope from Jerry's lawyer arrived at my office marked urgent, but I didn't rush to open it. Inside was a single page confirming all financial obligations were complete, and the settlement was fully executed with no remaining claims from either party. I filed it in the folder marked Jerry that I hadn't opened in weeks, and realized I'd gone 3 whole days without thinking about him once. 2 weeks later at our monthly board meeting, Camilla pulled up a PowerPoint showing our donation numbers for the quarter. The graph showed contributions had actually increased by 32% since the whole mess with Jerry started. She clicked to the next slide showing comments from major donors who specifically mentioned respecting how professionally we'd handled a difficult situation. One donor had even increased their annual gift by $50,000 after hearing about the challenges I'd faced while still keeping the shelter running smoothly. The board voted unanimously to approve our expansion plans, and everyone stayed after for cake to celebrate our success. That weekend, I met someone at a nonprofit leadership conference downtown who ran a food bank across town. We sat together at lunch talking about grant applications and volunteer management, and I found myself laughing at his stories about his most memorable donors. He asked if I wanted to grab coffee after the last session, and I said yes without overthinking it for once. We went to a little place near the convention center and talked for 3 hours about everything except work. He knew about my situation because everyone in the nonprofit world had heard something, but he never asked for details or treated me like damaged goods. We started texting about random things like which foundations had the worst application processes and meeting for lunch once a week. 3 months of lunches turned into actual dinner dates, and eventually I told him the whole story about Jerry and the abortion and everything else. He held my hand across the table and said he was sorry I went through that, but glad it led me to where I was now. A random Tuesday in September brought another legal envelope, but this one made me smile. The divorce decree arrived with official stamps and signatures, making everything final after all those months of waiting. I signed my name at the bottom using my maiden name for the first time since my wedding day. The pen felt good in my hand as I wrote out each letter carefully and deliberately. I made copies for my files and updated my driver's license and bank accounts and email signature. Everything with Jerry's last name went into a box for shredding, and I ordered new business cards with my real name. The shelter won a Community Impact Award from the city that October, and they wanted me to accept it at their annual gala. I wore a dress I'd bought myself with my own money, and stood at the podium in front of 500 people talking about our programs. The mayor handed me a crystal plaque and posed for photos that would run in the local paper the next day. Jerry's attempts to destroy my career had failed completely, and everyone could see me thriving in my role. After the ceremony, several other shelter directors approached me about partnering on a regional initiative for workforce development. On my birthday, I walked into a jewelry store downtown just to look around without any plan to buy anything. A pair of small silver earrings with tiny blue stones caught my eye in the case near the register. They weren't expensive or flashy, but something about them felt right, so I bought them with my debit card. The saleswoman wrapped them in a little box with a ribbon, and I wore them out of the store. They were the first piece of jewelry I'd ever owned that wasn't connected to Jerry or sadness or manipulation. Every time I caught my reflection in a window, I noticed them sparkling and remembered I'd chosen them myself. 1 year after that horrible mediation day, I stood in front of 40 shelter directors from across the state leading a training workshop. My presentation covered supporting staff through personal crises and creating workplace policies that actually protected vulnerable employees. I shared my story without shame or hesitation as an example of why these policies mattered. The other directors took notes and asked questions about implementation and legal considerations. During the break, several people thanked me for being so open and said my story gave them hope for their own staff members facing similar situations. By the end of the session, 3 shelters had committed to adopting our workplace violence policies as templates for their own organizations. I packed up my laptop and materials, knowing that survival was possible, and thriving came next. That's my side of things. Now I want to know how you'd handle it, because your takes are always the best part. Drop a comment below and let's see all the different perspectives. I'll be reading through them.